Right now, we may be seeing one of the biggest backtracks by an automaker in our lifetime. So for Dodge, the success of the new Charger is basically going to dictate the success of the company. Stellantis desperately needs a win, and we were told that win was going to come in the form of a completely redesigned Dodge Charger, building on the wild success of the Charger over the past 20 years. The only catch is that the V8 engine that made these cars so popular was out, and instead you were either going to choose a full electric Charger or a turbo 6-cylinder. Or at least that is what Dodge was telling us up until about 15 minutes ago, when their CEO very strongly implied the new Charger would be offered with a V8. So today we are going to talk about this very difficult situation that Dodge is in, their original intent with the new Charger, and ultimately what has led them to change course. Obviously, the Charger nameplate carries a lot of weight, dating back to the 1960s when Dodge was taking a lot of very big swings with various muscle cars. The blueprint was pretty simple. Take a sleek, stylish body and a fairly basic chassis and throw in a big, powerful V8 engine. Of course, this era would end up being pretty short-lived. In the 1970s, there were a bunch of emissions and fuel economy and safety regulations that rolled out, and the Charger would have to undergo some very substantial changes to stay afloat. First, being rebranded as a big luxury personal coupe, and then subsequently being brought back as a front-wheel drive subcompact hatchback. But ultimately, neither of those two solutions would be good enough to keep the Charger around, and it was ultimately discontinued in 1987. The next piece of the Charger story actually has to do with a completely different model altogether, being the Chrysler 300. Now, the Chrysler and Dodge brand have been intertwined for a very long time, with the broader Chrysler group managing both. And as a result, over the history of these two brands, there were various different cars that were basically badge engineered to sell as either a Dodge or a Chrysler. To throw one more curveball in the mix, during the late 1990s and into the mid-2000s, the Chrysler Group had intertwined ownership with Mercedes-Benz. The reason I mention that is because when it came time for Chrysler to build the 300 and the new Chrysler LX platform that a whole bunch of vehicles were going to be based upon, let's say Chrysler took heavy inspiration from a Mercedes E-Class design from the 1990s. Subsequently, when it came time for Dodge to release their new full-size sedan, it made sense that it would be built on this Chrysler LX platform. Now, I often think that Dodge makes some of the best branding and marketing decisions of any automaker, and the decision by them to call this new sedan the Charger, I think, was nothing short of genius. And the most important thing is that during the Charger's hibernation, automakers had figured out how to make horsepower again, and it wouldn't be long before Dodge was putting big, powerful V8s into the new Charger. The other car that is important here is the Challenger, and it has a similar origin story with its nameplate, again dating back to muscle cars in the 1960s. In the mid-2000s, when Dodge decided that they wanted to build a retro-inspired two-door pony car to compete with the Ford Mustang, they decided to brand it as the Challenger. And there really wasn't a ton of debate about whether this car was a muscle car or a sports car playing pretend. It was big, it was heavy, but it had a powerful engine and was primarily focused on straight line performance. Over the next 10 or so years, it would be like another renaissance for the Charger and Challenger. With the introduction of the Mustang GT500 and the Camaro ZL1, it would basically start an arms race for horsepower amongst these big American automakers. But it wouldn't take long for Dodge to come out with the ultimate mic drop in the form of the Hellcat. It is hard to understate just how much hype was built up around this car. Putting a 700 horsepower V8 into a car that could reasonably be purchased by the average enthusiast was truly a game changer. The brand would continue to push the performance envelope by coming out with both the Demon and the Redeye. And the way that all of these different cars were marketed was kind of in this way to create this sinister, aggressive brand, and it turned out to be very successful. Now, while these ultra high performance models did not make up the majority of Charger and Challenger sales, they did something very important. They created a brand identity around these two individual models, but also around Dodge as a whole, and acted as something that was really aspirational. For the vast majority of enthusiasts, the Demon, the Redeye, and for many, even the Hellcat is likely going to be out of reach, but instead they could opt for a 392 Scat Pack model, a 5.7 Hemi Charger or Challenger, or even a V6 powered car. And in turn, Dodge was rewarded with some very good sales. Over the past 10 or so years, the Charger was easily averaging around 80,000 units per year, and the Challenger with an additional 50,000. But despite the success of the Charger and the Challenger, the Chrysler group, now under the ownership of Stellantis, was facing some pretty big issues. The main reasons for their struggles, at least from my perspective, was that they really focused in on short-term profit at the expense of long-term stability. The company refused to invest in developing new products, and as a result, their lineups just got old and outdated. On top of that, it also seems like they may have cut some corners in terms of quality control and are now facing major reliability concerns. From a business perspective, things are not looking good for Stellantis and by extension, Dodge. Amidst these larger corporate challenges, Dodge had to make the decision to phase out the Charger and Challenger as we knew them. True to form, they milked these two cars for all that they were possibly worth by coming out with like a dozen special edition last call models. But the truth here is they had to discontinue these cars because they were severely outdated. Again, they were using the Chrysler LX platform that came out in the early 2000s, but was really based on 1990s Mercedes-Benz technology. The Charger and Challenger were long overdue for a major overhaul. And this is where Dodge had a very big decision to make. While Dodge could continue to sneak in their V8s for at least a few more years, it's not going to be a tenable long-term plan. By 2020, EV demand and EV hype was reaching an all-time high, and the automakers all knew that emissions and fuel economy standards were only going to continue to constrict. So the decision was made. These two models would be replaced by one single car called the Charger, and it would be marketed as an EV. And beyond just that, it would be marketed in a way to signify we are entering a new era of Dodge performance cars. Now, somewhere along the line, Dodge announced that they would also be making a gas-powered version of the new Charger, but instead of being powered by a V8, it would be powered by a turbo inline-six in the form of the Hurricane engine. And on its own, this powertrain is pretty impressive. In existing configurations, it is already making well over 500 horsepower, and you would suspect once the SRT team can get their hands on it, it is capable of making far more. But the argument against this engine would be that no matter how good this turbo inline-six is, it is not as true to the Dodge brand as a V8 would be. The other odd part about this car, beyond it being offered with both a gas and electric powertrain, is that it will also be offered in both 2- and 4-door variants, which I find to be particularly bizarre because they had what I thought was a pretty successful partition between the 2- and the 4-door versions when they had them split out as their own separate models. To me, this is a clear sign of a company in panic that is willing to try just about anything to have a new successful product. And the latest news here is that a V8 engine is not out of the question. So this is all stemming from an interview that The Drive conducted with Dodge CEO Matt McAleer. During this interview, the Drive pressed him pretty hard on the prospects of using a V8 in the new Charger. And while McAleer gave a lot of different answers and kind of dodged the question a bit, the one thing he didn't say was no. What he said was that the new Charger is a multi-energy platform that can accommodate both gas and electric powertrains. And in response to a direct question about one of those powertrains potentially being a V8, he said if there is a business case for it, then there is potential. The one response that I think really summarizes his attitude here is, quote, V8s are no longer a bad word around the company. So, while absolutely nothing has been confirmed, this is a massive departure from how Dodge has been talking about the new Charger up until this point. The message that they have been laser focused on is that this is a clean sheet build for an electric muscle car that moves the Dodge brand into the future, and that V8s were a relic of the past. But for the Dodge CEO to come out and kind of bait the waters by saying this and opening this door, it is a massive departure. Now, as for what prompted this, I think it is likely a combination of a few different things. The most relevant component here is that the former Stellantis CEO and noted V8 hater, Carlos Tavares, is no longer running the company. The second is that there has been a very sustained and legitimate slowing in EV demand growth occurring in the United States. And the third is that there is also a new presidential administration that is likely to roll back regulations. Many people will likely hear this news and immediately attribute it to the new presidential administration, but I think that likely has the smallest role to play here. An automaker's product development cycle is planned 2, 3, 4 years in advance and should really be agnostic to political cycles. What it should be focused on is responding to the demands of consumers. And totally independent of politics, it is clear that Americans are not buying EVs at the rate that we expected them to 3 or 4 years ago. So for some of the actual logistics here, if Dodge does in fact decide to put a V8 engine in the new Charger, my suspicion is that once they made the decision to co-develop both an EV version and a gas-powered version of this new car, it would only make sense for that gas version to be capable of fitting a V8 engine, even if that's not necessarily what they're leading with, and instead they're going to try to push the Hurricane engine first. And given the green light, there could be a relatively quick turnaround where Dodge is able to take one of their Hemi engines off the shelf and put it into this new model. Now, as excited as I'm sure a lot of enthusiasts are going to be, I think Dodge needs to be extremely careful in how they go about this if they do decide to bring back the V8. There is a very real possibility if they do bring back the V8 Charger, it is going to simply cut the legs out from both the EV version and the Hurricane-powered version, and Dodge will have, in effect, just wasted all of those R&D dollars to develop those two different powertrains just to keep on selling a V8 Charger. If they do decide to build this car, I think they need to look to their very recent past and the success that they had with Hellcat and with Demon and Redeye and make the new V8 Charger a halo car. It needs to be something incredibly exciting, but also aspirational, so in effect, it will help drive sales to the 6-cylinder and EV versions. The same exact way that the Hellcat and the Demon drove sales to V6 and 5.7 Hemi cars. At the end of the day, for Dodge, the company, where they really need to expand their footprint is in terms of vehicles that have better fuel economy, better emissions, coming in the form of either EVs or downsized turbo engines. And if they need to use big, powerful V8 engines to help get there, then I think it's kind of a win-win. A big part of what got Dodge and Stellantis into the current mess that they are in is a refusal to innovate and a refusal to adopt and invest in new technology. With the Charger, they have a rare opportunity to do just that, to turn the page and to break new ground and allow this Charger nameplate to establish a new era in Dodge performance.